Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consol, your host. Before we begin this episode, I want to alert you that my latest book is now available in both print and ebook formats. The title is Love American Style, and it is a collection of short stories about men, women, their passions, and their dysfunctions. There's a short link in the episode notes that will take you to my Amazon profile page, where all 4 of my books are listed, 3 novels in this new short story collection. Again, the title of the new one is Love American Style, named after the TV series that ran from 1969 until 1974. Now, on with our program. In the spotlight is Barbara Kyle, novelist, book coach, popular speaker at writers' conferences. She has online programs where she teaches people how to write more effectively. In fact, she's got a webinar coming up that we'll talk about that has to do with the 3 things that an agent or an editor absolutely needs to see in those first 30 pages of the manuscript, which is so critical. You know, I got to tell you that when I read novels, so often it's those first 30 to 50 pages where I feel like, wow, this is a celebration of language. And then it slumps after that. And it's like, okay, you got past the agent, you got past the editor. So maybe we'll talk to Barbara also about, how do you keep from the slump after all that effort into spit shining those first 30 pages and prevent it from dropping off? And I've also heard people say, if you don't have variation, then, that you don't recognize the peaks without the valleys. So Barbara has, I'm sure, thought a lot about this. We'll get her opinion on this as well. So I don't recall if I even mentioned, but Barbara was an actress for 20 years before she became an author. So she's got a lot of really interesting things to tell us about writing, acting, the creative process, and getting past those gatekeepers, as I was saying. So with that, Barbara Kyle, welcome to Novelist Spotlight.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Mike. Great to be here.
Tell our listeners what else they should know about you. I've given them a very high-profile overview. What else should they know about you?
I think you gave an interesting overview in that it made me sound like I'm just working like 25 hours a day, which sometimes I must say I do feel like. No, that's great. Novelist, definitely. Book coach, definitely. And it was nice the way you introduced me as having been a former actor, if you don't mind my saying.
Actor, yeah. Nowadays they're called actors, right? It's male actor or female actor. But I notice people, is that correct in the business? Just like with SNL, everybody says a skit, but in the business they call it a sketch, not a skit.
I
And
know, I
isn't that
know.
true?
The nomenclature, if that's the right word, the
Yes.
naming is important to people, isn't it? And yes, in the business, I think that female actors do like to be called actors these days. Sometimes it's hard for old folks like me to sort of wrap our heads around it because when I was acting, which was, I mean, I've been out of the business a long time, but I was an actress, and then the language changed, and I appreciate the way the language has changed. We don't say doctoress, we don't say
Yeah.
lawyeress. Why have we always said actress? So anyway, yeah, I was
But
an actor.
most people still say actor, actress. When I say actor, and it's a woman, my wife says actress. And I said, well, no, actually they call it's a male actor or a female actor. So people haven't really, and I've said to my wife, it's not a skit, it's a sketch. And she said,
That's
well, I
right.
don't care what they call it in the industry. We call it a skit. And I said, that's what little kids do at school, not professional actors on SNL. Anyway,
It's like I remember when I was in high school and in the drama club, and I would say to my mother, "I have to go." Oh, she said, "Are you going to play practice?" And I would just bristle. I would think it's not play practice; it's rehearsal.
exactly,
I
exactly.
mean,
Don't make me sound like a little kid.
yeah, yeah,
Or that I'm a dilettante. This is my life work here. Or it
exactly. In
was
high
part
school,
of your life work. That was chapter 1. In chapter 2, you became a novelist. But before we even get into that transition, I want to ask you a question I've never asked anybody on this program before, and that is, what single characteristic? You obviously have a multitude of of positive characteristics, or you wouldn't have been as successful as you've been, Barbara. But if you were to identify a single characteristic that you possess that was indispensable to your success as a writer, what would it be? And also, is it the same as that made you successful as an actor? Let's start with the writing part, though. What is that characteristic, would you say?
My goodness, yes. One characteristic, a friend of mine years ago, because I've been writing now for, I guess, 30 years, 12 novels behind me. And I remember my friend years and years, way back at the beginning when I was just starting to write seriously, and I took it so seriously. She said that the word she used for me was driven. And I remember
Mm.
thinking that was pretty scary. And yet, I think it might actually be rather accurate, driven.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's so many people who say that the difference that there's a lot of people who succeed in the business strictly because they have that stick-to-itiveness. They're driven, they keep at it. It takes time. I mean, Stephen King always tells a story about the tacking the rejection notes to the wall until he had so many, he had to use a spike to hold them against the wall. And
Yes.
obviously um, he broke through. So what about is it the same with acting? Would you say that your success as an actor did it have to do with being driven, or was there some other element there?
That's very interesting. In fact, I would say it is not the same. When I was acting, it's funny because acting is such a collegial art, really, You work as a team. And of course, you were really just a conduit for what the writer has created. Whereas as a writer, you're working in it's such solitary work.
Mm.
But I would say driven as a writer, yes, and not so much as an actor because it was more like it was really just a lot of fun. Yeah.
Now, you were doing stage acting, is that right? Did you also do screen acting? Did you do commercial acting? Did you do, when by commercial, I mean literally TV commercials? Were you on the silver screen at all? I don't know your acting background.
Yes, all the above. My training was at the National Theatres. I'm Canadian, and my training was at the National Theatre School of Canada in Montreal. So it was classical training, Shakespeare and Shaw and Congreve, we took in the first year we took fencing and we did lots of improv, and then we did classical productions of classical plays, a lot of Shakespeare. So that was my training. And then, yes, I did all of the above, a lot of stage work. I did a great deal of commercials, as one does to pay the rent when one is an actor. And I did TV series. Um, I did a soap opera called High Hopes, and that was syndicated. Yeah, so and I've done made for TV Disney films, that sort of thing. It's so far in the past, Mike, that it's hard for me actually to remember at this point. But I did all the above. I must say I enjoyed the stage work, I think, the most because the word collegial just comes to my mind again. It's such a fun activity to be with your actor pals creating on the stage because it's alive.
Yeah, and I've done movie sets where they were filming just in my job as a reporter back in the day. It's been many years since I've been on those sets, but it's incredibly boring. It's such a sexy business, but when you actually go to watch a movie being made, it's not exciting at all. I can understand where the stage, you've got the nerves and the intensity and the rapport, the audience. It's got, you're on the knife's edge where it's just let's do that one again, let's do that one again, and it's so chopped up making a movie that you don't see any continuity there.
No, you're right. You hit the nail on the head with film acting or TV acting. The actor is just one of the cogs in a big machine. And the phrase always is, hurry up and wait. You get there at 5 in the morning, you're sitting in makeup and sitting in your costume, and you wait till at least 10 or 11 to do your one scene or whatever. Completely different, of course, on the stage where it's alive
Yeah,
every night
yeah.
and you're depending on each other. So it's just so alive. Yeah, such fun. Very, very different. They always say, people say that film or TV too is a director's medium, but the stage is the actor's medium. And I think that's
Mm.
probably pretty accurate.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Now you write now. Do you write stage plays or for the screen? In addition to writing novels, you write for what, stage and screen?
I have never written for the stage, no. I have written one screenplay, and that was produced. It was a small budget film called Saving Dinah, and it's available on Amazon Prime. Just that one screenplay. It's not my favorite medium because I guess in my bones I'm a novelist because I love the interiority of the novel. I think the glory of the novel is that we get to know exactly what a character is thinking, what they're feeling. Whereas in a screenplay, you cannot write any of that. In a screenplay,
Right.
all that's on the page is action and dialogue. That's it. And maybe a tiny line every now and then of someone's reaction. But basically, you have to pray for a good actor to bring it to life.
Hmm.
Completely different in a novel where you can write deeply into the interior, what I call the head and the heart of the character. So they're vastly different techniques of writing. So
And vastly different experiences for the person who is going to a movie or a stage play versus reading a novel. And I've said this before that the director gets to make all the decisions in a movie. They supply all the visuals. A novelist lets you co-create with them because when you introduce a character, it fires their own imagination and they create the character in their head. They see that character. I remember reading The World According to Garp, and then I see the movie, and it's like I love Robin Williams, but he is not Garp. He's not masculine enough. It's like, because that's not my conception of what John Irving wrote. And he wrote a masculine wrestler, and that was not Robin Williams. I mean, as great as he was, that was not his
and of
channel.
course, and of course, John Irving was a wrestler too. Um,
Exactly. So he knew what
yeah,
he was doing.
I heard you. I listened to a lovely podcast of yours. I guess it was a few years ago when you were celebrating your 100th podcast.
Aha.
And you talked about this, and I so agree with you that in a movie, the it's so passive. It just washes over you. You were just given this thing. You're not
Yes.
creating anything as the viewer. It's a marvelous experience, of course. But when you read a novel, you do have to create everything. It's almost work.
Yeah, it's a passive versus active experience, and one where the imagination is exercised and one where it is not so much exercised. And I've said this several times, as you know, the 100th one. I didn't remember saying it then, but I know I've said it on here several times because I feel so strongly about it. I think that that's the superiority of the novel. Not that one's superior, but it's a different experience. So let's appreciate. And I think that's part of what really makes a reader is a person who's got a good imagination. Because if you don't have a good imagination, if you don't get visuals, the novel's not going to be as great an experience as a person who has a good imagination. So I think that's kind of part of it. There's
I
plenty of
know.
people who don't have a great imagination, so reading becomes more information gathering than an art experience.
Yes, and you hear some people say that they cannot read fiction because they do lack that connection, that imaginative connection.
Hmm.
Can't imagine not. Was it? I think also you were quoting, if I'm going to mangle the quote, but I think it was George R. R. Martin. You were quoting saying that uh, if
Yes,
when you live your life, you live one life, but when you read when you read fiction, you live thousands of lives, something like that, and
exactly.
it's
That's
absolutely
right.
true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great quote. I'm glad he said it because I thought it's so true. Let me ask you about creativity. Is there anything you're going to sit and write? Is there an activity or ritual that preps you for the actually sitting down, something that triggers your creativity? Is there anything ritualistic? Do you meditate? Do you exercise beforehand? Do you drink a special potion?
Uh, my yeah, my routine, there's nothing magical, and what I suppose what makes my creativity flow is a contract, a deadline.
There you go.
Yeah, a deadline. You sit down and yet you just have to do it, and then it starts to flow eventually, no matter how you might be fighting it. So I think you really do just have to sit down. Author Wei Choi, he said there's only one rule in writing, and it's AC, ass on chair. And that's about right. Even if you don't sort of feel up to it. And it's funny, Mike, that really there's a parallel there with acting too. I remember doing shows on stage where I was sick or where I was really fed up with the stupid play we were doing or whatever. And but you have to go out and do it every night, and you have to give the people what they came for, what they paid good money for.
Yeah.
And so you have to
Yeah.
do it. So it's not about feeling it. It's that it's your job, and you must summon whatever energy flow is necessary to do that. So I feel the very same about writing. You sit down and you just have to create every day. That's all there is to it.
There was a writing coach who's I sat in with her, and she um, said writing is an act of faith. You have to believe in the process, and it will come along. Just like you're saying, it will come along, but unless you sit down and you do it, you're going to be discouraged along the way. But that's why she says it's really an act of faith that things will emerge. They will
That's
emerge
right.
as long as you continue to put the energy into it.
That's right. As long as you let yourself open to that. I mean, we even hear athletes say this, runners, they say, "Oh my God, it's 20 below outside, and I have to go and do my run this morning, and I hate it. It's dark outside and everything." But once you get outside and you warm up, and then you start to run, and then, oh, okay, now we're back into the now it feels good once you get the blood flowing, right? So I think it's the same process. And you know what? It's probably the same physiological process, even with your brain, as a runner. Who knows? It might be the very same thing going on when you're writing.
Now, are you a runner?
I'm not. I used to be
Okay.
when I was younger.
But
I am a walker. I do walk almost every day, about an hour every day. Yeah.
okay, well, there you go. So, one of the things that's antithetical, and I've said this before too, that's antithetical to writing is we sit. And we know that brain stimulation comes with physical movement, whether it's
Uh-huh.
walking, running, hiking. I even find that if I drive in a car, just the passing images spark my higher level of mental activity. And do you ever take writing on the road in some way? Take a recorder with you while you're walking, or do you ever go to a place that's not solitary where you're around people just because you want the shared energy?
I could not possibly be around people and hear people. I need silence. But first part of your question, I rely on things coming into my head or into my consciousness when I'm taking a walk. I love to walk in the woods, for example, and very solitary. Um, my husband and I used to live in a rural area, and there was a long distance hiking path, and it was called the Bruce Trail. And I had so many ideas from my books over the many years that we lived there, and I was walking there. I don't know if I would call it hiking, but I was walking there almost every day, and I'd have always good ideas for the book I was writing. And my husband said that I needed to give an acknowledgement with special thanks to Bruce Trail.
I,
And it's
I,
true. I think I really do rely on walking and I think you make an excellent point. It probably really is physiological. We need to be moving.
Yeah.
I
Even pacing. I mean, I find sometimes my wife will say to me, what's going on? You're pacing. I just like the pace. The movement is good in it. And especially if I'm at home and let's say I'm working on something, and then I kind of am trying to break through on a scene or with a character or whatever. Just getting up and pacing, I find, is really helpful. Let me ask you about the turning point in your well, first of all, how did you make the decision to move from acting to fiction writing?
Well, it happened to me because it was around the time when I turned 40. And I had, as I say, I'd had a very nice career as a female actor for 20 years. But when I turned 40, the roles started to drop off. They were better roles for women when they get older, but they were fewer. There were fewer roles. And I'd seen this happen to female actor friends of mine where the career just kind of started to dry up. And I thought, maybe I don't want that to happen. So maybe I should consider doing something else. And I thought, well, I've always loved reading. Maybe I could write. I didn't have a clue, but I thought I would try it. And I made a decision. I made a very conscious decision to work at learning to write. And the hardest thing I ever had to do, I think, as far as this whole transition was giving up my kind of identity as an actor. The day that union dues came due for Actors Equity and for in the States it's Screen Actors Guild, but here it's called ACTRA. Those two union cards I had to renew, and I had to say to myself, no, I'm not going to renew. I'm going to commit to writing. So that was really, really hard because it was like I'm giving up being an actor, but I'm not a writer yet. So what the hell am I? So that was hard, but I did it. Um, and I started to write short stories as one does. My first one was pretty bad, but I worked with a wonderful mentor. Her name is Marian Fowler, author Marian Fowler, and she helped me rewrite it and rewrite it. It went on to win a contest and made me very, very happy. And I realized then I don't want to write short things. I want to write something really big. And then I started to write on my first novel, which took me, first novel took about 3 years, I think, because I was learning as I went.
Sure, sure. So you didn't really start writing until around age 40 then?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. It never occurred to me. I just was enjoying my acting career very much. But as I say, I could see the writing on the wall that, that probably the career was going to go downhill as I got older, especially because I had always been playing kind of ingenue roles, young things. And so I was known for that. And so I could see that the career was not going to be developing. It was going to be the opposite. So I made the decision to start to learn to write, and it turned out very well.
You are the Tina Louise of Canada. Yeah, once you're ginger and you're young and beautiful, you're pigeonholed, you're
Do you know,
typecast.
do you know one of my good friends? She just died a few years ago. Was Dawn Wells, who played Mary Ann.
Oh yeah, I met her one time at a business event. I even gave her a kiss on the cheek, with her permission. I said, "I got to get a photo for my one of my sisters is nuts about you. Can I give you a kiss on the cheek while the photo's being taken?" Because they do the publicity photos right there at the event, and she was such a sweetheart. I'm really yeah, she was my
So
favorite.
she was a sweetheart. She was a wonderful person, and we acted on stage together. And yes, I loved Dawn. And she always used to say that the guys were always in love either with Mary Ann or with Ginger. It was never, it was always one or the other.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And did you want the glamour queen or the girl next door is really what it came down to. And she was the girl next door. She was just
She
sweet
was,
as could be.
and it was very authentic. Yeah.
So, what about the turning point in your writing life then? Now, you obviously found a great coach, Ms. Fowler, and she coached you along the way. Was there anything that happened over the years that was a breakthrough of some kind, or whether it's your own writing technique or something that happened in terms of within the industry? I don't know whether that question really lands with you,
Yes,
Barbara.
absolutely, it does. There was an absolute turning point. Marion Fowler, as I mentioned, she was the first mentor because she really opened my eyes to what was possible about writing because I was so green. But once I had finished writing that very first novel, the big turning point in my life was that first novel I wrote attracted one of the top agents in New York, Al Zuckerman of Writers House, I signed with him, and he sold that book within about a month, I think it was. So he was a fantastic mentor to me. Al Zuckerman was his name. He just retired about 4 years ago. So I'm with a wonderful new agent at Writers House. But Al really was the turning point because he was such a magnificent editor himself and just a great mentor as far as getting my career going and staying on track. He was just a wonderful person to work with. So that was the turning point when I signed with Al Zuckerman, for sure.
Wow. Now, I said at the top that in fact, you have an upcoming webinar. I think it's on October 28th. Is that right? About the three things agents and publishers must see in the first 30 pages of a would-be novel. Is
That's
that
right. Yeah, yeah.
okay? So I'm gonna, listeners, the link to the page to register for the webinar, which is free of charge. Is that right? It's free of charge, Barbara?
It is. It
That's
is.
what I thought I saw. Okay. Is in the episode notes, so you can go ahead and get signed up. But Barbara's gonna give us a highlight. She'll go deeper during the webinar. But Barbara, can you share with us the three things that the agents and publishers have to see in those first 30 pages? What will you be going deeper on at the webinar?
Oh, absolutely. The first is that there is a clear inciting incident. Uh, the second is that there is a main character that we can really care about. And the third is effective use of dialogue, somewhere in the, I would say far before 30 pages, but certainly within those 30 pages. And when I say 30 pages, it's sort of approximately 30 pages of what we're talking about. So the inciting incident, as I say, that's the first thing. There must be a clear inciting incident. And when I'm coaching writers, I always define the inciting incident of a story as the event that throws your main character's life out of balance. So there are lots of ways to start a novel that do not start with that inciting incident, but you're going to get to it within the first 5, 10, 15, 20 pages, or certainly by 30 pages. The event that really upsets the balance of your character, of your main character's life. I always love to talk about The Wizard of Oz, especially because not only is it a great story, but also because most people have seen the iconic movie, right? Even if they haven't read the
Yes.
Frank Baum novel. And it's interesting because the inciting incident of that story is the tornado, right? Dorothy is swept away by the tornado. I mean, that's an event that naturally completely upsets the balance of her life. And it incites, I love that word, it incites her need to get back home. And that's what drives her through the rest of the story. But it's
That's a
fascinating. Yeah,
great
but
example.
it's a great example because it's so easy to understand. But also, I love to point out that in that story, certainly in the movie, it's very clear that the tornado is not the first thing that happens. It's not on page one, as it were. But you see Dorothy engaged in something that really matters to her right away. And I think that's just as important before we get to a novel's inciting incident. You see that Dorothy is engaged deeply with the fact that horrible Miss Gulch wants to grab Toto, her beloved dog Toto, Dorothy's beloved dog, and perhaps put the dog down. And so because of that, Dorothy starts to run away. And that is when the inciting incident happened. The tornado strikes and carries her away to the wonderful world of Oz. So I think it's very instructive as a great example of both a very clear inciting incident and how it incites her, how it upsets the balance of her life and incites her, and also how the story doesn't begin with that. It begins with something that just really engages Dorothy, the main character. And I
Right.
think it's good advice for probably almost the opening of almost any novel.
So you also mentioned dialogue, but what was the second one again?
The second one is a main character that we can really care about.
Mm.
And when I'm giving the webinar, because I've given this webinar a few times before, I love to talk about 5 ways that you can create instant empathy. I'm not going to talk about all those today with you, Mike. But but during the webinar, I do talk about 5 ways you can really create immediate empathy for a main character. And they always work. You can choose 1 or 2 of them, whatever, they always work.
There's the cliffhanger right there. Now, what about dialogue? What do you think needs to be accomplished with dialogue that kind of nails it?
Yeah, with dialogue has to be what I call, or what all, as a writer yourself, as a novelist yourself, character specific. And that is just that the characters don't all sound alike. So we want all the characters to speak in their own individual way, as far as possible, with their own vocabulary choices, their own syntax, maybe special idioms that they have. Uh, and also that as far as just writing dialogue, I think it's important. A lot of writers will sometimes ask me about dialect and writing dialect. And I caution against writing long passages of dialect. That is, writing in a phonetically rather than the normal natural spelling, the customary spelling, because it's just hard for readers to try to decipher phonetically written dialect. But apart from that, I think that the most important thing is that we always are writing dialogue that is character specific, that each individual speaks in their own unique way.
Mm. You have mentored hundreds of writers. You have online programs. So I'm curious to know what you see as the biggest issue that generally is dogging aspiring novelists, a kind of a problem that's really recurrent or a most common problem that new writers face when they're trying to get a novel written.
One thing I think that I see somewhat regularly and is a weakness in people's writing is that they is a certain passivity of their main character. Um, I remember reading, I think it was yeah, Pixar Studios. You know, they've made so many wonderful movies. A lot of mostly animated films, right? Pixar Studios. And I found a list somewhere, I can't even remember where I read it, of the 10 rules of storytelling of Pixar Studios. And one of their rules, if you can call it that, is that we care about a character who tries, really more than almost than they're succeeding at anything. So a character trying is so important. And that's what I mean about non-passivity. I think we want to see characters who are actively trying to do something, and that's when we really care about them. Doesn't mean they're going to get what they want. They probably won't, or maybe your story will end, but it means that they're really after something. They want something that matters to them. So we care about characters who are trying. And so I do see that quite a bit, a sort of passivity where things happen to a character rather than focusing on what the character wants and what they're trying to do, and therefore how that brings them into conflict with other people or
Yeah.
with circumstances.
Yep. Characters need to bust a move,
Yeah,
get things going here.
that's
Um,
nice. I like that.
what about what I had talked about during the intro, Barbara? And maybe your experience is different than mine, but I will pick up a novel, and again, those first 30 or 50 pages are terrific. They're really great. And then it just drops off after that. The writing becomes a little bit milk toast the rest of the way, or it may just be the slump in the middle, and then they kind of get things fired up again towards the end of the book as they're coming to the conclusion. Um, to begin with, I don't know if that's your experience or not, and if so, what would you advise people to do to I mean, maybe they've just turned the novel in too early or called it a day, or I mean a book too early. I don't know. What would you say?
Well, certainly it's my experience as a reader, and as a reader, if it drops off after the first 20 or 30 pages, I stop reading. Life is too short to
Yes.
continue on. However, when I am coaching writers, it's my job to try to help them find why it is dropping off. And inevitably, it's because the characters are not really active enough. Just what I was really speaking about.
Mm.
I'm a great proponent of writing an outline. That's something that my wonderful agent, Al Zuckerman, taught me many years ago, to spend a lot of time writing an outline. And that's because I think the heavy lifting of creation for plot and for character creation, and of course, plot only springs from character, it all happens for me in the outline. And I always advise writers to spend a lot of time on their outline because that's when you can find out very quickly in a kind of a 20-page outline if what you have thought was a great idea for a plot development really doesn't spring from the characters at all. It was just a kind of a, I loved the word you use, milk toast, and there are milk toast plot ideas too. And if you see it in an outline, you can think, well, why? Why isn't that working? And then you can really find a way to have your plot development truly spring from what the characters want and need and are trying to go after and whatever the conflict is because of that. So I think you can work out all of those things so easily. I know it because that's how I worked myself over 12 novels. Oh, you can work all that out in an outline. Whereas if you're just working away, for a whole year on a novel, and then at the end of it, you realize, well, it's just really not working that well. You've invested so much time and so much energy in it that you tend to not go back and fix things. Whereas if you're working on an outline, you can easily say, well, that doesn't work, that idea. It was a good idea to start with, but it doesn't work, so I'm just going to scrap that idea. And then how about this one? And try that idea, whether it's for a character's motivation or whether it's for a plot development. And you can be much more radical in finding out what works and what doesn't. I love proselytizing about this because I know it works so well. And again, my
What do you
agent
mean
taught me
by
this years
more
ago.
radical? Do you mean that you can take more chances that you wouldn't ordinarily take unless it was outline version?
Exactly. For example, the climax of any novel. It's hard to come up with a really satisfying climax that springs from. Um, I always I always kind of define the climax moment as the moment when your main character makes their final, absolutely irrevocable choice. There's no turning back at this point. And an example that I love to give, because that sounds as though it's, armies clashing on a battlefield, which it might be for somebody's novel, and that would be fine. But the example that I love is Henrik Ibsen's play, A Doll's House, where that climax is simply a woman packing a suitcase and saying goodbye to her husband and walking out the door. And when Ibsen wrote that climax for that play back in, I think it was 1867, I don't know, I'm just making up the date there, something like that in the late 19th century. It caused a sensation, right? When a nice middle-class woman walking out on her husband was considered a degenerate act.
Mhm.
But it was her irrevocable decision, the same as the armies clashing on the battlefield. So you can be radical with climax ideas, climax concepts when you're working through an outline, which if you are working through whole drafts of a whole novel, 350-page novel manuscript, you tend to cling to mediocre material because it's so hard to go back and change the motivations that will lead to a far more natural
Yeah.
climax. What the Greeks called, character was, sorry, fate was your character. That's what the Greeks taught us, right? Um, so yes, I think you can be
Those,
more radical with ideas. While working on an outline, you can say that climax, I thought it was, I thought it was going to work, but it kind of sucks. So I'm going to go back and think of something better. And inevitably, I'm telling you, I can tell you from experience, it works.
wow, those are great points. Let me ask you though about the person who, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. When the first couple of things I tried to write, I wrote myself into a corner because I wanted it to be spontaneous. I wanted the story, the characters to take on a life of their own. And guess what? The, I just hit a dead end and I abandoned the project entirely a couple different times. So that's when I started thinking, well, maybe an outline's not such a bad idea. But what about the person who says, I want it to be more spontaneous. I want it to be more organic. Uh, is it, do you still feel that you can have a detailed outline and achieve organic or spontaneous writing?
Absolutely. In fact, I think that it's more creative. It's actually not about you. When I say you, I mean the writer. It's not about you, the writer. It's about the characters. And I remember wonderful John Cleese, John Cleese, the British
Yes. Uh-huh.
writer comic. And he had a wonderful line. He said, creativity is not a talent, it's a way of operating. And I
Interesting.
absolutely agree with that. When I'm working on an outline, the characters only come to life when you've gone through many drafts of the outline because they're, at the beginning, as a novelist yourself, Mike, they're just these little stick figures on the horizon. And when you start, they're just sort of doing strange things. You can't really tell what they're doing. Uh, and you just have to get to know them better. So when you use the word organic, to me, it happens organically by working through the outline, by seeing what do they want? What's the most important thing to them? What will they do to try to get that? And then they will show their mettle. It's always about characters making choices. That's what plot development really is.
Yeah,
I have no
true.
idea if I've just answered your question or if
No,
I've just.
you did. You did. And you not only did you answer a question, but it's one that I accept. It's how sometimes people answer questions like I don't quite buy that, but no, I get what you're saying for sure. And having gone down that path before, where I ran into a dead end myself a couple of times, that's a lot of work for no payoff, and that's not a good thing when you put
Isn't
that
it?
much.
Isn't
It,
that the truth? That's what I say. You
yeah.
work so hard at it, and then you realize, well, it's just not that great. And and then to go back and start from scratch is a hard thing to do. And it's not hard to do if you're just working on an outline. You can be, as I say, you can be bold and radical. So I love that line of John Cleese, that creativity is not a talent, it's a way of operating.
You make me that when you talk about radical writing, there's oh, she's passed away now, but she wrote a book called If You Want to Write, and her name is Brenda Euland, and she talked about writing dangerously,
Ah,
really taking chances. And it's on the written page, all those things that we're afraid to do in life or we'd be foolish to do in life, you can actually do on the printed page because you're not putting yourself at any physical risk or emotional risk necessarily. But if you're not willing to do that, then you're not necessarily going to um,
really see the full parameters of your creativity, or be adventuresome as maybe you should be. I don't know if you've ever heard of her, Brenda Ullin. It's an old book, and it's called If You Want to Write. And she talked about dangerous writing. Yeah, be dangerous.
I just wrote it down here because I'm going to check it out. I had not heard of it, but I'm writing it down because I want, If You Want to Write by Brenda, is it
Yeah,
Newland, Neuland?
it's Ueland.
Oh, okay. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, I might not even be pronouncing her. And it's a small book, small potent book. In fact, I'm just typing it into. I want to make sure I've got this. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, If You Want to Write, Brenda Ullin. It's on. It's available. It's got 4.5 stars and hundreds of reviews. So, yeah, uh, she really. I'm just taking a look to see if. Yeah, she talks about ditching the rules and
And I love
uh,
your word or her word, dangerous, because don't you think that's what
yes.
all good fiction is, that we vicariously live through the characters? What would I do if I were in that situation?
Yeah. Or what would I want somebody who I know just, if I wanted to have a chemical reaction here, what would I
Yeah.
want that person to be doing? And she says, let me run this past you. She talks about writing for yourself first. So, in other words, you're not, now I'm gonna put words in her mouth, but you're not going to succeed by pretending to be somebody else. It's not like acting where you can succeed with acting. You've succeeded by being a character. But she's saying if it's not your real voice, you're not going to hit your peak.
Do you know what I have found? Over many years of sort of testing out these sorts of theories, I have found that it's not what would I do in that situation, and it is not what would this character do in this situation. It is this. It's what would I do if I were that character in this situation? Now, it's a
Mm,
subtle distinction, but it's almost like thinking like an actor because it's you as far as you're filtering yourself, your own knowledge of life and your own life experiences. You're always using yourself, but then you're writing a character. So it's what would I do if I were that character in that situation? I have found it's very helpful. It's a kind of a nuanced distinction, but I think it's helpful.
yeah, no, I get it. It is a distinct, a true distinction there. What about um, your book? Well, you have a book called Page Turner, and it is. I want to actually read the subtitle to our listeners because I love the subtitle as well. So it's called Page Turner: Your Path to Writing a Novel That Publishers Want and Readers Buy. Tell us a little bit about Page Turner. I mean, obviously, it's a writing book. Can you give us kind of a high level summary?
Yeah, I'm glad you like that subtitle because I wanted to not it be, I didn't want it to be to hype the concept. I wanted it to be simply that publishers want this book because that's a hard thing to do, and also that readers will actually buy it. So I wanted to not hype that sort of subtitle. Yes, Page Turner is a how-to book for writers. It's sold very well, and I love hearing from writers saying that it's been a real light bulb moment for them reading Page Turner. I break it down into the analysis of characters first, and always first, story structure, and then style. Style being, of course, dialogue and imagery and setting. So I don't know exactly what else to say about it because I could go on for a long, long time about it. But
No, that's good. What about voice? Let me ask you, a lot of writers spend their many years trying to find their voice, so to speak. And then I've heard writers say, well, no, I don't have a voice. I have to give voice to the people I create. What's your take on that? Do you feel that there is a voice that Barbara Kyle, Barbara Kyle when you're reading her, because you recognize her?
I do not think about voice myself at all. I'm always only thinking about characters. So I would agree with the phrase you just used of people saying that about the characters. However, I certainly recognize wonderful voice when I read it. I just, recently read, as probably many of your listeners have, and maybe you have, Barbara Kingsolver's wonderful Demon Copperhead.
Mm.
And the voice she created for young Damon Fields there. It's just
Wasn't that book, like it was picked as the top novel of the past 25 years or 50 years. It was something like that, ranked way high. It may have just been the New York Times editors who did that, or they went out broader than that to critics. But I mean,
I
it's
would
a hugely, didn't it win the Pulitzer?
It won the Pulitzer in yeah, 2 years ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if the New York Times critic said that. I think it's magnificent. So there's a voice for sure. But
You bring
personally, when
up
I'm writing, I do not think about voice. I only think about the characters, and then that voice comes through. Especially if you're writing in first person. I mean, there's just no question you need to create voice for that, but it will always come because of what the character's wanting and needing and what they're going after.
You mentioned Barbara Kingsolver, and earlier when you were talking about walking, and that's really a part of your lifestyle and your practice, it made me think of Joyce Carol Oates. She is another author who does a lot of walking. She feels like that's critical to her writing.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that. That's great.
yeah, yeah. She's somebody I've been trying to get on the program. She doesn't do a lot of publicity though. She's too busy writing her 200th or 300th novel or
She never
whatever she's
stops,
up to.
does she? She never
No,
stops.
she's just incredibly productive, and she just cranks them out.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't mean that in a, cranking it out makes it sound like it's a a half-hearted effort. Not that at all.
No,
Uh,
no.
what did you when you started writing? What was your experience in terms of what it did for you emotionally? Because obviously it did something for you emotionally. It had some kind of psychic reward for you, or you wouldn't have continued to do it. So, what emotion were you feeling when you started to realize this is what I should be doing now, or what I'm meant to do in the next half of my life?
That's a fascinating question, isn't it? The emotional connection. Yeah.
Like, what
Uh,
did you feel? I mean, do you get high? Do you feel that natural high like a person would feel in a downhill ski slope if that's what they do? Obviously, it's not that kinetic, but yeah, I
you,
mean, I'm just wondering because it's an onerous process, and people still do it, even though it's onerous and it can be even torturous, but they're getting something out of it. And I'm always curious, what is it that Barbara Kyle gets out of it? Other
yeah,
than a paycheck, other than a paycheck.
yeah. Do you mean the sort of emotional high of reading and wanting to write, or do you mean when I'm actually writing?
When you're actually writing, like when you're having a great writing day, let's say,
Ah,
things are
ah.
clicking. What are you feeling? And actually, if you can kind of go back in time a little bit to when you were first getting started, what was that original emotion that you felt or experience you had that made you say, this is what I am meant to do for the next half of my life?
Oh, absolutely. It's a high, no question. And it certainly doesn't happen often when you're starting. Or starting any new book,
Hmm.
because it is just those little stick figures on the horizon who you don't have a clue what they're doing. But really, the emotional high for me is when the characters, of course, start to come to life, and also because I love story structure. Also, it's when I know I have created a turning point scene that really is effective. I love that. That's a real high. I learned from screenwriter. Oh my God, my mind goes blank. He wrote Story. He does the famous
Oh
seminar.
yeah, Robert McKee. I
Of
read that
course, thank
book
you,
too.
thank you.
Yeah.
You know that book, yeah. And I went to his seminar years ago. It's for screenwriters, but it absolutely helps novelists too. And I learned something so big from him, from his seminar and from his book, Story, about turning a scene. He said we're always trying to turn every scene. We can't turn every scene, but we're trying to. And the turning point scenes have to be a big turn. And the way he described it, and it's now what I do when I'm coaching writers. It sounds incredibly analytical, but my God, does it work? And that is, it's a kind of a based in physics. If you're based in electricity, the concept of electricity, if your scene, a big turning point scene, starts in the negative, let's say something like if the value that you're turning the scene on is, let's say, hope, then if your scene starts negatively, that the character is hopeless, that they're in despair, then you must turn that turning point scene to hope. There must be hope at the end of that scene. And vice versa. If the scene has started with hope, then that turning point scene must turn just like electricity to from the positive to the negative, that you must end that scene in despair. It's really,
Interesting.
isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have I have forced myself in my writing sometimes. For example, if I'm writing a scene that I know needs to be a turning point scene, but it isn't quite there yet, I literally say, well, Robert McKee taught me that to think about electricity, positive and negative charges, and how does a scene start, and therefore it must end in the opposite charge. And my God, does it ever work? It's just a great technique.
Boy, it was quite a while ago that I read it, and I didn't remember that, but that's a really interesting technique. One of the other things I think I remember, and you can check me on this, Barbara, he talks about writing the screenplay and not allowing the characters to have any voice, and then you tear the duct tape off their mouths at the end. And he said by the time you do that, they're dying to communicate. And and you as a writer, you're dying to give them voice. Now that's a screenplay, which is a lot smaller in terms of, but when you write a novel and you're going scene by scene or chapter by chapter, I suppose it can be done. I've never tried that technique, but um, it's what I
But it,
recall from him.
But it's interesting too, because sort of just riffing again on the concept of working on an outline. After you've worked so I worked for months on an outline until I know that the book is really solid. Then you really are bursting. These characters are really bursting to be now put into a full draft of the actual novel. You're just bursting to do it at the end of that.
Yeah.
You have to, because you're just longing to give them their interior life, which when we started to talk today, to me that's the glory of the novel, that you get into the head and the heart of a character in a novel that you can never do in a screenplay on the page. Only an
Right.
actor can bring that to the to the life
And
of
they
a
try to do it in the actual movies sometimes by doing voiceovers, which is
yeah.
an interesting. It's almost cheating a little bit. It's almost like, oh, I'm going to take an element of novel writing and I'm going to introduce. I want people to get the interior, which normally is the domain of, as you say, novels, not so much movies,
I think it's
more
fascinating
surface
that
level.
that narration techniques works brilliantly on the page of a novel, but I hate it in a movie. It's almost like a cheat. It's like, don't tell me, show me.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. What about your writing regimen? How do you what's your daily writing practice? Are you a morning writer, evening writer? Or do you do the word count thing? Do you time it? Are you more flexible in that? What do you do?
I've sort of developed over the years um, a schedule, I guess you could call it, that really works for me. It certainly doesn't work for everybody, but every writer works differently. But for me, I use the mornings always. First thing in the morning, I just do business. I sort of get warmed up by answering emails and interview questions, that sort of thing. But when I start to work at around, I don't know, I start those emails around 8 o'clock. So once I start working on the book at around maybe 9, 10, then I fix what I wrote the day before. And it's my favorite thing to do. My favorite thing to do is fixing. So I love doing that. And I have to, in fact, cut myself off around noon, or else I go on doing it all day, just fixing what I wrote the day before. So then in the afternoon, then I will work for a few hours in the afternoon on creating the new bit, whatever comes next. And I love the security of knowing that no matter how bad it is or how weak or just how not fully formed yet it is, I know that tomorrow morning I will be able to fix it.
That's a great point. Yeah, so it gives you permission to actually. That's another Brenda Euland. That's another point she makes. Give yourself permission to write badly, and because you've got this the kind of work cycle you use, you take away a lot of the sting of it, knowing I'm going to fix it tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I love that she said that. In fact, that's really what I tell writers also. Always give yourself permission to write. It's a stupid word, badly, but we know what we mean by it. It's
Hmm.
just weak. It's just not there yet, all these sorts of ways of looking at it, but we know it. And so I love knowing that the tomorrow morning, and then of course all night long, you're just thinking, oh, I see why that didn't work. Oh, I see how I can fix it tomorrow morning. And I love doing that.
Fresh set of eyes, morning hours. Yep.
Yes,
Yeah.
and your subconscious too, right? Your subconscious is working away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's part of what I think people sometimes don't appreciate is that that incubation period where
Yeah.
they just you're still working, your subconscious mind is working on it even when you're not working, or certainly when you go to sleep at night, it goes to work.
I know
Um,
I didn't when I started to write and people said that, I didn't believe it because I thought, no, I need to be in charge of what I'm doing here, this work. But I after many years of writing now, I know that it's true that your brain is somehow sorting things out when you're really not aware of it, and then the next day, it becomes clearer.
yeah, another person who was helpful to me. It was Anne Lamott in her book Bird by Bird, where
Yes,
she
that's a
really,
beloved book, isn't it? Sorry to
isn't it?
interrupt you, but it's a beloved book. Yeah.
I mean, that whole thing where she says all those great authors that you love and you cherish, they write shitty first drafts just like you do.
That's right.
And I
That's
mean, she just emphasizes over and over, it's you're going to write a shitty first draft, just get over it, write it, and then you're going, writing is rewriting. And then I remember hearing um, A Visit from the Goon Squad. That's
oh yes. Oh,
Jennifer Egan. Jennifer
Jennifer Egan.
Egan. So
Yep.
she's on the
Yes,
radio.
Manhattan Beach. I loved Manhattan Beach. Yeah.
She's on the radio being interviewed, and they said, "Well, tell us about your writing process." And then she says, "Well, I come up with an idea for a chapter, and then I write the chapter." She goes, "And of course, it's terrible." And I'm thinking this just validate. She had just won the Pulitzer Prize for A Visit from the Goon Squad, and I said, "This is just an exclamation point on what Anne Lamott's been telling everybody. Here's a Pulitzer Prize winner who just wrote a kind of a landmark novel, and she's." Says, of course, it's lousy the first iteration. So,
It is, that's
um,
right. And we have this idiotic concept in our culture that if as a writer you have talent, that it will just flow naturally. Nothing could be further from the truth. We really have to work through things.
yeah,
That's
it's a
what
lot of work.
creativity is keeping working at it until it looks like it has just flowed naturally.
Yeah, yeah, and remember Philip Roth saying that nobody, everybody has to. Yeah, the great Philip Roth saying everybody has to struggle with it. He said, except maybe John Updike. He seems like, and that's exactly how I would felt when I would read John Updike. It just seems so easy, and he just gets it to that point. But it just seems like, I mean, his command of the language and all, and the way it flowed was, and I understand the criticism that he dawdled too much. He writes magnificently about nothing, some critics would say, but then he had his great the Rabbit novels, won a couple Pulitzer prizes, and
Yeah,
um,
it's such a shame that in our technological world now we don't keep drafts, and so we don't see what writers have changed, how they've edited their own work. Whereas in the old days, you can still see manuscripts where half the stuff is crossed out by the author as they're editing themselves, right? But we don't see that anymore because everything's just gone. It's
that's
ephemeral.
right.
Yeah.
It's true. Um, if you were going to have if you could have a dinner party at your house and you could invite any three novelists, living or dead, to be your guests at that dinner, who would you pick?
Oh yes. Oh yes. Well, living would be Barbara Kingsolver.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't like the word dead, but not living anymore. I would say John le Carré, one of my favorite
Hmm.
authors, and also P.G. Wodehouse. Whenever I'm feeling blue, I just turn back to P.G. Wodehouse, and I'm just always, not only does he make me smile and sometimes laugh out loud, but I'm just in awe of his comic genius and the glory of the language that he has, He's just, yeah, he's my go-to guy when I'm feeling down. So I would say P.G. Wodehouse, John le Carré. Oh, and also I would have to say, can I have four?
Go for it.
Because we have Barbara Kingsolver already. I would say James Clavell because really, I think one of the novels that made me really want to write was Shogun,
Mm,
back in the late 70s, early 80s.
yeah, I think it dates back that far. Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I was just knocked out by that book, and And so I would love it if James Clavell, and it's interesting because I read everything of his after Shogun, and the most beautifully put together novel of his, because as he was more and more famous, his books got a little bit bloated after Shogun. But his very first book was called King Rat, set in a prison camp, in a prisoner of war camp. And it's very, very tight, completely unlike his kind of bloated later books. So I would say James Clavell also.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say dead because successful novelists are never dead. Their work
There you
lives
go.
on,
There
you
you
know.
go.
So let me ask you about the future great novelists. There's the aspiring novelists out there. What's your best piece of advice to an aspiring novelist? If you could just give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
Understand that it's a process, that creativity is a process. I would always say part of my advice is always work on an outline. It will not stifle your creativity. It will be the opposite. And basically stick to it. Absolutely stick to it.
Hmm. So if you could go back in time, what would you tell a 25-year-old Barbara Kyle? I mean, this is a little different for you because you've lived two different lives. You've been the actor, the female actor. Now you're writing. Now you're a novelist and a book coach and so on. Um, but even beyond maybe the arts that you've been involved in, what would you tell your 25-year-old self if you could go back in time?
Well, it may not sound very inspirational, but I think I would like to tell myself to be more knowledgeable, to educate myself better about the business, about in the case of writing, the business of publishing, business of what agents do and what publishers do. And I think pretty much the same as far as acting. Uh, I think that, for example, just a simple little thing, but my first novel that my wonderful agent sold to Penguin right away, um, he got wonderful blurbs from best-selling authors for it, and it was just glorious, these lovely blurbs. And idiotically, I did not get in touch with those authors to thank them. I think that in my mind, I was so insecure back then still that I was thinking, oh, they were on a pedestal, and why would they wouldn't want me to contact them. And so I regret that I did not contact those wonderful writers who gave me wonderful blurbs and thank them. So that's a little thing, but you know what I mean? Just be
Yeah.
aware, educate yourself about the business, what it is that agents have to deal with, and what it is that editors at a publishing house, what an editor at a publishing house has to deal with. I think that's probably what I would like to have told myself. Yeah.
Since you were an actor and you are now a novelist, the fusion of the two is often represented with um, these streaming channels, Netflix and Prime and Apple TV and all. What have you been streamed over time that you really love? Are there a few shows that you would point to that would give us maybe a little bit more insight into your taste?
Oh, my taste is pretty eclectic, and maybe it is for everybody. I like whatever works. I don't care if it's a rom-com or if it's some action adventure, gory as it can be, as long as it works. Uh, Personally, just recently, I have loved watching Shogun because that was one of my favorite novels back in those days when Clavell published it. But the brilliance of the TV series Shogun, which just cleaned up at the Emmys a couple of last month, I guess. So I
Hmm.
loved watching Shogun. And just now, we're so enjoying watching Bad Monkey. Um,
Oh yeah.
it stars Vince Vaughn, who's tremendous in it, but it's based on the novel by Carl. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Carl Hyacin.
Oh, Carl Hyacin. It is.
Hyacin.
Oh, that's one of his novels. Okay.
Yeah, and it is terrific. It is such great writing. Obviously, because of thank you for the correct pronunciation. The author, the novelist did all the heavy lifting, but the screenwriters have just done a magnificent job, and the actors are it's perfect. And it's interesting, having been an actor, I know that actors cannot save bad writing, but actors love it when it's great writing and you can go to town with it, and they do. So Bad Monkey is wonderful. I'm loving it.
Wow. Wow. That's a great. I'm going to check it out. I've seen
Ew.
it advertised and I have not even looked at it yet.
It's
So that's a
funny, it's
great lead.
funny, and it's just so snappy, and every character is a delight. they're all crazy.
And I'm a big Carl Hyacin fan, but I don't believe I've read Bad Monkey. I've read a bunch of his books, so I'm gonna probably need to read the book too.
Good,
Um,
good.
so our guest has been Barbara Kyle, novelist, book coach, former actor, and don't forget that she's got on October 28th upcoming webinar where she will reveal the 3 things that agents and publishers must see in those first 30 pages
And can I
of any
interrupt?
would-be novel.
Can
Oh,
I
please.
interrupt you there? Because I should have said that people can find out a lot about my coaching and how I can help them. My website, which is just barbarakyle.com, and also that I have a brand new video course. It's 22 videos where I take you through every aspect of all of the essential elements of writing a novel. And that course is available through my website, and it's just called The Path to Writing a Page Turner.
There you go. Now, the link to Barbara's website is in the episode notes, and the link to the specific page where you can sign up for the webinar is in the episode notes. So you can learn a lot more about Barbara. We didn't really spend time talking about her novels in any detail, but you can go to her website and hopefully you've read some of them already. Anyway, Barbara, I love your energy, and I love how just you're able to answer any kind of discussion about writing so easily. I really appreciate you coming on the program and spending time with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Mike. And I love your energy too, and your love of writing.
Yeah, I do. We do.
Yep. Yep.